Hello art friends, it's Anoosha Syed here, your resident illustrator extraordinaire and soon to be published author. Yes, oh my god, this is such exciting news. So for those of you who did not catch the news on my social media already, I recently made the crazy announcement that I got a 2-book picture book deal with Penguin Random House. I've been a professional illustrator for about 6 years now, and I've illustrated over 20 books in that time, but they've always been books for other authors. I'm always illustrating other people's stories, and I've never illustrated my own stories until now. So I cannot believe I'm going to be an author. This is a dream I've had literally since I was a kid, and it's finally coming true. So if you guys missed it, the announcement was made official on the Publishers Weekly website on April 26th. And it reads, Anika Kalia at Viking has acquired in a preempt debut picture book That's Not My Name by Anoosha Syed, about a girl whose first day of school is not what she expected when no one says her name correctly, and how she remembers to both love her name and use her voice. Publication is set for fall of 2022. Taylor Martindale Keene at Full Circle Literary brokered the 2-book deal for world rights. So yeah, I'm going to be writing and illustrating 2 picture books. The first one is That's Not My Name, which is scheduled to come out next year, and the second book is Untitled right now, and it is going to come out in 2023. I'm super excited to be working with my editor Anika and my art director Jim, and I'm actually currently working on the final art right now as well as the cover, which is why I haven't been posting as much. I've just been super busy these days. I'm really sorry. Like with most of my picture books, whenever That's Not My Name comes out, I will be making a video going over my process of how I made it in its entirety, going from the sketches, final art, whatever, and then this time also be going over how I actually wrote it. But that's gonna be so far away into the future, so I thought that for now it could be fun if I made a video talking about my book deal. While obviously I can't talk about my deal in detail since a lot of it is confidential, I thought it would be interesting to go over my deal in a more general point of view so you guys understand why I wanted to be a writer, but also give a bit of guidance for anyone who is interested in pitching their own stories one day and kind of walking through what the publishing process is like. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about the following: why I decided to write my own stories and be an author, my process in writing a picture book, creating a book dummy, getting your book ready for submission, how to pitch and sell a book, or at least how I did it. No surprise, this is going to be yet another super long video for me, so if you want to skip ahead to a part that's more relevant to you, I included all the timestamps below. I would actually really recommend watching my 2 videos on agents first before you watch this one. I have an agent who I absolutely love, and having representation can be a big part in getting published, and so I made 2, in-depth guides on how to get an agent and what they actually do. It would be helpful to have that background information before watching this video, but of course you can always watch it after as well, and I'll link them below. Also, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to my channel. I am, as I said, a professional illustrator, and I make lots of videos talking about what it's like being an illustrator, how to get into it if you're interested in it as a career, talking about things like portfolios, art directors, and so on, and I also make chill studio vlogs sometimes. And finally, I'm going to include a pre-order link to That's Not My Name below. It's not going to be up there yet when I post this video, but as soon as it's available, I'm going to include that link. Pre-ordering books is super important for the success of a book because it lets the publisher know that there is interest for it. And so if you guys are interested in supporting my work, and if you are already thinking of getting the book whenever it comes out, then I would really appreciate it if you decided to pre-order it instead. That would make me super happy. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's go. Why did I want to be an author? Maybe this part might be boring for some of you guys, so you can always skip forward if you want. I won't blame you. But I do think it's a little bit important to just understand my story and how I actually got to this point in my career. So story time, I guess, where I talk about myself for the next 10 minutes. I was a huge bookworm as a kid. I absolutely loved reading. I was a kid who would devour books in one sitting and was friends with the school librarian. And from a young age, I always knew that I wanted to be a writer. Throughout my childhood, I would just spend hours on the family computer writing up a bunch of short stories and little plays and all sorts of little weird things. And then all of that changed when I was in high school. When I was in my freshman year, I was part of the school newspaper, and they needed someone to draw the monthly comics. And I happened to be the only person in the class who kind of had some drawing ability. And so that was kind of my job, and I did the comics for the school paper. And the funny thing was that the teacher for that class was also the school art teacher, and she saw my work, she thought that I had potential, and she encouraged me to take art with her next year. And then the rest is history. So eventually I got a bachelor's degree in illustration from this teeny tiny little art school in Switzerland called Ceruleum École d'Art Visuel. And in my last year in that school, we had this picture book course. And as part of that, we went to the Bologna Children's Books Fair. And while I was over there, I was just so amazed by all of the talent, by all of the books. And that's when my kind of interest pivoted more to children's book illustration. While I was at that convention, I also discovered an illustration agency that had a booth there. Let's just call them L Agency for now. In my last semester at Ceruleum in 2015, I had to create a thesis project. This was like a self-guided project. It could be literally whatever you wanted. Some people did like advertising, some people did like graphic design or whatever. And because I was really interested in illustration and children's book illustration specifically, I decided that I was going to write and illustrate my own picture book from scratch. I hope that this would give me practice for the real thing one day, but also more importantly, I hope that this would be like a good portfolio piece that could eventually submit out to art directors and whatnot. This book was called Chip and the Rainy Day. It was this really cute story about this little cat who's afraid of water, and his friends are trying to just convince him that rain is not so bad after all. I worked really, really hard on this book project, and I'm actually still pretty proud of it. Like, my art has improved a bunch in these past 6 years. And there are a lot of things that I would change, but overall, I'm still really happy with how it turned out. Okay, so why am I bringing this book up? Basically, I was really proud of the work that I did on Chip and the Rainy Day, and I wanted to see if I could get it published. Keep in mind, I had no idea how the industry worked. I was just like, okay, I made this thing. Maybe someone can make it into a real thing, I don't know, and put it in bookstores. So shortly after graduating, I did a little bit of research, and I initially tried to submit this book dummy out to publishers. But I soon discovered that most publishers, they don't accept unsolicited submissions, which basically means that they require you to have an agent in order to submit manuscripts and whatnot, especially if you want to work with one of the major publishers. I did try to send this book out to anyone who was open for submissions, which was not that many people, but I knew that I needed to get an agent if I wanted to move my career forward and if I ever wanted to get this book published. So right after graduating in 2015, I signed on to that L agency that I mentioned a little earlier. And eventually I was with them for 3 years. I've already mentioned in previous videos that I did not have the best time with them. But one thing that happened early on was that I went up to L Agency and I presented them my book, Chip and the Rainy Day, and I was like, hey, do you think maybe you could submit this to some publishers? I didn't know what the publishing process was like, but I hope that at least L Agency could take a look at it and maybe do something with it. They initially said that they'd be happy to take a look, but after I sent over the material, they never said anything back. I tried to follow up with them a couple of times and ask about my book, but I was always ignored, so eventually I figured that my agency just wasn't interested in the book or if they were even capable of pitching it. Because I had no idea how the industry worked, this left me with 2 conclusions. Number 1, illustrators just don't write picture books. That's an option for authors only. Authors/illustrators are extremely rare, and my only option is to illustrate other people's stories. That's just how it is. Number 2, my stories are not worth reading and I have to stick to illustration. Which in hindsight, these conclusions are just totally wrong, but I didn't know that at the time. Again, I just did not understand how the industry worked, and I didn't have any way of learning it or anyone to teach me because this kind of stuff wasn't really taught to me in schools, and I couldn't really find any resource about it online either. It's pretty much why I started this channel, so that I might help someone out there who is in the same position that I was once in. Anyway, I was with L Agency for 3 years and illustrated maybe 15 books in that time. And this was me always illustrating other people's work. Some of those books were good experiences and some of them were not. After a while, I decided to leave L Agency and I really thought I was going to go solo, that I'm sick of agents, I'm just gonna do it by myself. But soon after, I met Taylor from Full Circle Literary, and she was actually the agent of the author that I worked on for the book Bilal Cooks Dal. She slid into my DMs, she saw that I didn't have an agent, and she was like, "Hey girl, I like your work. You don't have an agent? Let me see if I can fix that." And so yeah, we got to talking. There was a lot of smooth talking on her end, and in April of 2018, I joined my current literary agency, FC, let's just call them that for now, represented by Taylor. I thought I was done with agencies, but I did think that this could be a chance for a new start, because while L Agency was an illustration agency, FC was a literary agency. If you remember from my agents video, illustration agents deal with all aspects of illustration. This is a good option for people who want to work in all areas of illustration and aren't tied down in publishing. Literary agents, on the other hand, deal with publishing opportunities only. Taylor would handle all of my book projects but wouldn't touch any other general illustration projects like the ones that illustration agents do. In the past, literary agents mainly worked with writers, but many are starting to work with illustrators now. If you ever want to write as well as illustrate, or if you feel like your art is better suited for publishing, this might be a better option for you, since literary agencies have a better handle on the publishing industry than an illustration agent might. So in my first meeting with Taylor in 2018, she sat me down and then we basically talked over what my illustration goals were, like what kind of projects I wanted to work on, who are the kinds of publishers I wanted to work with, and so on, what my goals were. And she casually mentioned that we could soon start working on my own writing debut and what kind of stories that I wanted to write. And this sort of blew my mind. I was like, wait, what? I can write too? I can be an author too? I had gone 3 years convinced that this was something that I just could not do, something I wasn't allowed to do. And in that time, I actually became more and more convinced that this was something that I didn't even want to do. So after signing with Taylor in April of 2018, we soon got to work on like these new illustration projects that were starting to come in, but she gave me the assignment that while I was working on that stuff, just in the back of my mind, think about the kind of stories I wanted to write. Around fall of that year, I was like, okay, I've settled in a little bit. Let's start to work on some ideas, brainstorm, draw out some rough concepts that I could present to Taylor. Hoping that by the end of 2018, we might have the beginnings of a concept ready to maybe start working on and develop. I shared a couple of ideas that I was interested in. I had a book idea about body positivity and finding love in how the way you looked. I had an idea about anxiety and kind of having it represented as like a monster that just won't leave you alone. And I had an idea for a book that was called like The Cutest Thing in the World, and it would just list like cute things on every page that would just get like more and more and more ridiculous, and then the last thing would be like, the cutest thing in the world is you, and it would have like a little mirror so like a kid would open up and be like, ah, it's me. Keep in mind, these concepts were just like extremely rough, like simple one-word summaries. They're definitely not like finished products at this point. And unfortunately, my concepts were not really that original. There are quite a few books out there already with similar themes of like body positivity and anxiety and whatever, and it didn't make sense to further develop them. I thought that The Cutest Thing in the World could be something that was really original, but literally as soon as I sent it to Taylor, like literally 2 weeks later, there was an announcement in Publishers Weekly of like a book that was gonna come out soon that was literally the exact same concept, literally called Cutest Thing in the World, and would even have like a mirror at the end and everything. The book is out now and it's super cute and really like good job to them. They pulled it off better than I could, but I was still really bitter about it at that time. So yeah, these ideas weren't really going anywhere, but that didn't matter because quite soon after I got the offer to illustrate the book, I Am Perfectly Designed, written by Karamo Brown and his son, Jason Brown. He is one of the guys from Queer Eye. It was a really cool project, super good deal, celebrity attached. So then I was like, okay, let's just put my book aside for now and let's work on this awesome project. And I did that until spring of 2019 after that book project was over. 2019 was when I actually started to work on my pitches, and now I'm going to start to talk about how to pitch your work and submit and everything. But finally, to wrap up all of this background information about my career, I want to share the 3 big reasons of why I wanted to be an author. The breaking point. 3 reasons that made me decide that I wanted to write my own book. Number 1, this is the reason that I've had since I was a kid. I've always wanted to be an author and I wanted to write my own stories. Especially since as a kid, I was never able to read about stories that I was able to relate to and that had kids in them who looked like me. I'm Pakistani, Muslim, there definitely weren't any books like that centered around themes like that when I was growing up, and only recently are we starting to see books like that now. As an illustrator, I did have the opportunity to work on a lot of books that were centered around those themes, like Bilal Cooks Dal and Rise Up and Write It, and I'm so thankful to be able to have been a part of those projects because I would have loved to read those as a kid. But I did want to have the opportunity to write my own story as well that felt true to my own experiences. Number 2. Okay, maybe this is a little superficial, but I wanted the perks of being an author. As an illustrator, being the artist for over 20 picture books, I kind of noticed that even though I did half of the work, sometimes more, the artist was often considered as an afterthought and the focus was put on the author. The authors were always the ones who got to go on school visits and events and the ones that the kids and the parents remembered. And in the news and social media, whenever there was an announcement or a post, they'd mention the author but would often forget about the artist. This person who sometimes did the bulk of the work. I've had a bunch of instances in the past where there'll be a news article featuring my books and they completely forget to mention me. And sadly, even have had authors not credit me in posts about their books or bring up my name in interviews. It really hurts when you put in all of this work and you aren't even given any credit for it. This is sadly a problem we see quite a lot of in our industry. Illustrator Dapo Adiola, I'm really sorry if I'm butchering your name, actually wrote an open letter to the BBC, I think last year, which was signed by thousands of creators. In it, he mentioned that when the BBC breakfast show aired a segment featuring a book that he illustrated and co-created with writer Nathan Byron, the host kept referring it as Nathan Byron's book and completely left out Dapo. Dapo also mentioned that in the Sunday Times best-selling children's book list, they only list the title and the author's name, and again, illustrator, no mention of them whatsoever. Because of the open letter, it turned out to be a huge success. The BBC responded and implemented a new policy that required that all visual artists must be credited properly on the breakfast show. This was great news, and even though this is a step forward, we still have a long way to go before artists are seen on equal footing as authors. This is also a huge problem with celebrity books. While I've been fortunate enough to be credited on the book I'm Perfectly Designed, a lot of artists aren't so lucky. I've been contacted to work on celebrity book projects in the past where they let me know that they won't give me any credit on the cover. And I always refuse those projects because I think that's really demeaning. But I know that a lot of other artists just don't have that luxury to reject projects like that. Just 2 books that I can think of off the top of my head. Jimmy Fallon and Natalie Portman both wrote picture books, and their names are big and clear on the cover, but absolutely no mention of the artist. You have to look at the back to find illustration credit. I understand that people are usually buying those books because of the big celebrity name attached to them and that they are a fan of their work. But that's no excuse for not giving equal credit to the artist. Natalie, are you telling me that you made this whole book? All of it? Really? It just amazes me that these celebrities are also creative, they're also artists, and they should understand how important the arts are and that they should be using their audience and their fame to lift other creators up, not shove them out of the spotlight so they can have it all to themselves. And while I'm still working to bring attention to this whole topic and lifting up other illustrators, I was also tired of the treatment, and that is one of the reasons why I wanted to write my own book. It might seem superficial, but I just want to be recognized for my work. And thirdly, again, this seems like another whiny complaint, so I'm really, really sorry if some people take offense, but this was something that has really bothered me in recent years. So at this point in my career, I've been working for quite a while now. I get quite frequent offers to work on book projects, and I'm really grateful and I feel privileged to be approached for all of this work. But I did start to see a recurring trend. Most of the books that I was reached out for was for topics and characters that were either Muslim or South Asian. which I am both. Now, in recent years, we've started to see this like amazing push for more diverse books, which is like a huge improvement from like the status quo of mostly white, straight picture books. It's not perfect, but at least we are starting to see more and more diverse works from diverse creators as well. Unfortunately, this does have a little bit of a negative aspect. I found that somehow these were the only books that I was being contacted for. And while I love being able to create artwork that showcases my identity, there is more to me than just my ethnicity and my religion. Now, don't get me wrong, it would be fine if it was just 1 or 2 books, but in 2019, I don't know what was in the water, but like literally 99% of the offers I got were for South Asian or Muslim stories. And it made me really frustrated because I know that the publishers were being well-meaning and that they had good intentions, but it kind of felt like they were ticking boxes or filling a quota. Because I, a Pakistani Muslim, would frequently get contacted for projects with like Indian or Hindu themes. And yes, like our cultures are really similar and like it's totally fine to illustrate outside of your country and religion and everything. But like that's not the issue. For me, it was more that like the publishers just weren't doing their research about me and kind of lumped me in with all South Asians as if we were indistinguishable. They're like, oh, you know, you're brown, you can do this, right? Like it's all the same. So I talked with my agent about this, and it seemed like this is kind of like a common occurrence with minority artists in the industry now. I love the books that I make, but I just didn't want to be typecast as the artist who only does important South Asian stories. There's more to me than that. Like, my dream is to work on a picture book that's just fun. Something silly and funny, like The Day the Crayons Quit or The Bad Seed. Something that's like, I just want to draw a book that has animals or inanimate objects as the main characters, with like these really funny and goofy stories. But instead, every project that I seem to get is like the South Asian story with like a big, important message about like self-worth and identity and racism, and it's like it's all this really heavy stuff, and I just want to draw cats and Vikings. And again, I was tired of it, and I hope that when I got the chance to write my own books, I would be able to get out of this hole that publishing was trying to put me in. Okay, those were my 3 reasons. Sorry this was really long, but yeah, now we get to writing a picture book. In July of 2019, after I was done illustrating I Am Perfectly Designed, I was like, okay, time to get serious, and let's get to work on some exciting new concepts again. I made a brainstorm file on my iPad and I just wrote on it. For about a month, whenever I had an idea, I would just jot it down on there. It was mostly nonsense, if I'm being honest. Things like, what if cactus wants to hug? Or, mom dinosaur cute. It really didn't need to make sense since this was for my eyes only and no one else was going to read it. It was just a way to write down my thoughts. The big thing that really helped me was writing down things that I am interested in. What are the types of books that I like to draw? Well, I know that I like drawing kids. I like drawing animals, plants. I don't like drawing cars or action scenes or dragons. And then I got even more specific, you know, writing down my favorite animals, favorite foods, just my favorite things in general. I like penguins and koalas and bandanas and glasses and pad thai and bumper cars. I also wrote down general concepts that interested me. I love near future sci-fi. I love mid-century modern art. I like flying cars. And then finally I wrote down things that were important to me or played a big part of my identity. I have anxiety. I am a third culture kid. I have 3 sisters. I have an uncommon name. With this big brainstorm list of words and phrases and concepts, I tried to connect 2 or 3 of them together and just see if something clicked. And eventually it did. So from my brainstorm, I came up with 2 really rough concepts. One was called My Name Is Not Hard, and that would be the one that eventually would become That's Not My Name. And then the other one is the secret unpublished book. Let's just call it book 2 for now. So using these 2 super rough concepts, I started to write out a very brief, very rough Word document summary, about like 400 words each. For That's Not My Name, I wrote out a summary of what I imagined would happen from beginning to end, like just a pretty linear story. For book 2, on the other hand, I didn't really have much of a story. I had a beginning, I had an end, and then in between I just had like a bunch of possible scenes that could take place without really like a story tying it all together. I sent these over to my agent and she thought that they had potential, but she also gave me some notes and she said that I should try to flesh them out into actual manuscripts for the next stage with page breaks. Instead of a one-page summary concept, I would try to convert it into a proper manuscript and divide my summary up into 14 spreads and just see where it takes me. I could have done 28 pages instead, but as an artist, it just makes more sense for me to work in spreads because I think more in terms of like illustrations. I had no idea where to begin in terms of writing a book, so I got to work and started to do some research online. One resource that really helped me was Josh Funk's Guide to Writing Picture Books, which I'll link to below. Some of the things that I learned is that 32 picture books are generally 500 words maximum. Older audience picture books might have a higher word count, but they will never be over 1,000 words. Because of the short word count, it's extremely important for authors to be really concise with their word choices and tell the story as cleanly and as efficiently as they can. Anything that's not in the text, you can expand or embellish with the artwork through using show rather than tell. Illustrations are a huge storytelling tool, and so I knew that as an author illustrator, it would be really fun using both of these tools with full control, both writing and illustrating to create my book. It's also really important to understand who your target audience is and write accordingly for them. Books for toddlers are going to be a lot less complex than books for preschool kids and so on. So you want to establish your audience first so that you can adjust your tone and complexity when you're writing the manuscript. The other thing that I did was research. I bought a bunch of picture books and also went through my own collection and just tried to read as much as I possibly could. I analyzed these books to figure out what worked and what didn't. Since I wanted my target audience to be ages 4 to 8, I made sure to specifically read books that were for that audience. There are just so many directions that a book can go in. Like it could be in first person or third, it could be funny or serious, it could have a moral at the end or a twist. It's important to read as much as you can so you also get a chance to figure out what kind of stories and structures that publishers like, because these are the ones that actually get published. I also wanted to search up my competition. There are a couple of books out there already which have similar themes to my concepts. There are some books that deal with like having a unique name, for example. It's fine to have similar ideas. It's really all about how you interpret it and really make it your own. I had to make sure that my story was completely unique, even if it had a similar theme, and just make sure it really stood out. So here's the thing. I've always disliked when people approach me for their book idea without any understanding of how the publishing industry works or how to write for children. Of course, it's not the case for everyone, but with some people, you really feel like they think that writing for children is just so easy. Like all you have to do is write a couple of lines, the artist will do all the work, and bam, free money. I've seen a bunch of TikToks which have like the same concept, which are basically get-rich-quick schemes on how to make a picture book, and they really belittle the craft of both art and writing, especially when in the tutorial they mentioned that you can hire an illustrator for super cheap off of Fiverr. That's really gross. In reality, writing books for children, especially good books for children, is incredibly complicated and difficult. Don't let the younger audience and the shorter word count fool you. Kids are a lot smarter than people give them credit for, and you do want to put in the effort to craft a story that your audience will genuinely enjoy and learn from. Apart from reading other people's works, there are classes and workshops that you can learn from. Some of the ones that I can think of include the ones from Highlights, Writers.com, and Masterclass. You could also see if there are any classes being held within your area, either at your local library or at a community college, at your regional SCBWI chapter, or any local writing groups. I understand some of these classes can be expensive, so I also encourage you guys to check out resources on YouTube and Skillshare. You can also find books on this subject, like How to Write a Children's Book and Get It Published, The Business of Writing for Children, Invisible Ink by Brian McDonald, and Writing Picture Books by Anne Whitford Paul. And I will link all of these resources below. And finally, it's important to get as many eyes as you can on your manuscripts. I showed my book to my husband, my family, my friends, and most importantly, literally any child I knew. It's easy to get lost in your own work, so it's really helpful to have like a new set of eyes with like a fresh perspective looking at it. And it'll help bring a new critique and some new insights. Since That's Not My Name is about the struggle of having a unique name, it really helped having insight from other people who went through the same situation. My book actually has a lot of scenes that are directly inspired by stories that people have shared with me. I find that writing critique groups with other authors are really helpful for constructive criticism. With all of this research in mind, 1 month later in August, I sent Taylor my first draft manuscript for both of my books. This had a Word document that had my entire story written out. I had already divided the text out by page, and because I am an artist at heart, I also included the art notes for what I imagined the illustrations would look like on each page. After reading my first draft, Taylor sent me some notes, which included things like changing That's Not My Name from first person to third person, and also rewriting a couple of messy scenes. There was still a lot of work left to do and a lot of problems to solve. So Taylor suggested that it would be helpful if I started to thumbnail my spreads and start to work on a book dummy. So normally this is what the process is. A writer creates their manuscript, they pitch it to publishers, they get a deal. Then eventually, when the text is at its final stage, the art director hires an illustrator for it, and then the illustrator and the art director work together to create the illustrations with little involvement from the author. So you have two creators with two very different skill sets who work on the book quite separately without direct collaboration, because there actually isn't any direct communication between the writer and the artist. Like on all of the books that I worked on, I never ever actually communicate with the author. It's always me and the art director. So the book process with an author and illustrator, it's more like two people doing a relay race rather than two people doing the tango, if that makes sense. But on an author-illustrator project, you get this really unique chance to have full control from day one, and you're able to intertwine the craft of writing and illustrating together seamlessly. Your text will influence the artwork, but simultaneously, the artwork will influence the text. So when Taylor told me that my next step was to create thumbnails, my first thought was, isn't it a little early to start working on the sketches? Shouldn't I lock down my text before I start to work on the artwork? That's kind of what I've been used to so far. But Taylor is smart, and she knew that I'm a visual storyteller. My artwork is how I normally do storytelling, and if I was having trouble with writing, maybe thumbnailing would start to bring the story to life. This actually really helped, and through the artwork, I was really able to figure out what kind of story I wanted to tell for both of my books. Through thumbnailing, I was able to clean up my manuscript further because I could see what elements I wanted to show through my artwork and what elements really needed to be told through the text. Another thing was that I was able to flesh out my characters a little more. Through drawing them, I was able to figure out their personalities and what their relationship was like with other characters. Keep in mind, these thumbnails are thumbnails. They're like extremely rough, kind of like this level of complexity. So for the rest of fall, I worked on my thumbnails, and eventually at the end of the year, I sent over my thumbnails as well as my revised second draft over for review. Unfortunately, things came to a halt pretty soon after at the end of the year. We were nearing 2020, and a couple of things happened which slowed things down a bit. Number one, Taylor announced that she was pregnant. This was such awesome news, but it did mean that she was soon going to be going on maternity leave, and while another agent from the agency would be looking after me during her time away, I wouldn't be able to work on my debut with her. Number two, I got engaged. So me and my now husband were planning for a summer 2020 wedding, and it seemed like the coming months were going to be super hectic for me. So me and Taylor thought it would be best for me to focus on my wedding planning and whatever other illustration projects that I had going on, and then eventually pick back up on my debut book after my wedding in July and her maternity leave. It was perfect timing. Number three, and finally, COVID happened. And the publishing industry went haywire for a couple of months with a ton of delays everywhere, so there was no point in rushing things. As much as I really wanted to get things moving with my book and I was really impatient, it just made sense to pause things for a while. So until August of 2020, we decided that I should work on my other books. But if I find some time in the middle of all of like the wedding planning and other book projects, I should clean up my sketches and my thumbnails and then also create 2 final illustrations as well. This is when I started to make my book dummy. So apart from sending over my manuscript for my big submission, as an author illustrator, I also have to include a book dummy, since I need a way to showcase my artwork as well as the text. Usually, a book dummy is a physical 3D work-in-progress prototype of your book, but here it's going to be a digital file. This document is going to give the publisher a clear idea of how you envision your book to look like. You'll have your art and text laid out, in my case, in a PDF file. Some people still prefer to print out their dummy while they're working so that they have a pretty clear bird's eye view of how the book is going to look like and also make changes while they're working on it. I'm going to include 2 resources below on how to make like a traditional physical book dummy if that's what you're interested in. For me personally, as a digital artist, I ended up working entirely digitally because that's what I'm comfortable with, and in any case, the app Procreate, which is what I work on, they have like, if you zoom out of your file, you can make like a library. So you have like a bird's eye view of your book anyway. So that's what I was fine with. For your book dummy for submission, you do not need every single page to be fully illustrated in final art. While it looks great, it actually would end up being a huge waste of time and energy. If your book gets picked up, there is a large chance that the publisher or editor is going to want to make changes, and that those changes could be like huge changes, and you don't want all of that work to go to waste, right? It's much better for your dummy to be created as like fully clean sketches, kind of like this level of complexity. So enough where like other people who view your work know exactly what you're trying to make it look like. And then on top of that, you would create 1 to 3 fully illustrated spreads as an example of what the finished product would look like, and also really showcase your illustration abilities. And you don't need these colored spreads to be in order, like they don't need to be like page 1, 2, 3. I would suggest picking the pages that really wow your audience. So in my case, I think I did like the first page and then like one of the pages in the middle that was like my like killer spread. That was just like your wow spread. Originally, I had planned to do 2 finished spreads for both my books, but in the end, I believe I did 2 for That's Not My Name and only 1 for my book 2 because I got really stressed with wedding planning and I was like, okay, I give up. Normally, you would illustrate the cover as well, but I forgot and I only did the interiors. For my 32-page picture book, I worked in 14 spreads, since when a reader normally looks at your book, they're gonna have it like open flat in spread form anyway. Before starting the dummy, I also went through a character design stage like I usually do for my picture books, going through several iterations of what my main characters are going to look like, as well as establishing the style of the book. In That's Not My Name, I kind of envisioned the style to be like pretty minimalistic. Like I didn't want to have a lot of backgrounds. It would be mostly white and then have the focus be on the characters and then also including speech bubbles. I thought that would be kind of unique. And then for book 2, I wanted it to be like a huge contrast to book 1 and then have that be like just backgrounds, like really beautiful, lush backgrounds. I wanted that to be the focus and have like 2 really contrasting visual languages and styles. As with all of my picture books, I also created Pinterest boards full of my references and inspirations and whatnot for each of my books. All of this development work is really important when crafting your dummy. I also decide what size and dimension I want to work with, what kind of font I like, and how I want my text to be arranged on the page. These things are optional and they're pretty flexible, since most likely these are going to be changed anyway once you start to work with the art director, since they might have their own specifications. On that note, I also don't really stress about margins and bleed and all of that stuff because this dummy is not a print-ready file, and again, art director is going to have their own say on all of that stuff. The only thing I have to say is just make sure you're not drawing in the gutter, you know, like the middle part of the spread. I treat this book dummy how I treat all of my illustration projects. You know, like making sure my art and my text frame each other well, having a variety of different compositions, creating appeal and story within the artwork. I'm not going to go into it too much in this video, but if you want to learn more about my process, you can watch my other videos on picture books. So from January to August of 2020, I worked very slowly on my book dummies. If this was a priority, I probably could have gotten it done in 2 months, but you know, a busy schedule, wedding planning, and a global pandemic kind of got in the way. But finally, by mid-September, right after my wedding, I sent Taylor my 2 finished book dummies along with a slightly updated 3rd draft manuscript. Me and Taylor went back and forth a couple of times, sending notes and making small changes to the manuscripts. At this point, the manuscript was pretty much set, and we just needed to focus on like those small grammar edits and some nitpicky word choices here and there. But after draft 5, we finally had our final manuscript and we were ready for submission. Submitting my pitch. One thing I forgot to mention is that normally people only submit 1 book proposal at a time unless they're planning on selling a series. When I came up with my original 2 concepts and sent them over to my agent, I was just thinking we'd submit the stronger one of the 2. Taylor and Stephanie, who is the co-founder of the agency and also the agent who looked after me while Taylor was on maternity leave, they came up with the idea of a 2-book pitch. It was a little risky, but they thought it could be worth a try. And if it worked, I would have 2 book projects secured in my future, as well as a stronger relationship with my future publisher. We felt that That's Not My Name should be pitched as my debut book though, and should come out first, because it felt more true to my identity rather than book 2, and it would be a perfect start to my author illustration career. For our submission, we need 3 things: the final draft of the manuscript, the book dummy fully sketched out with 1 to 3 finished illustrations, and the pitch letter. So I already covered the first 2. The pitch letter or query letter is basically the letter that my agent would send out to everyone on our submission list. Unlike adult and chapter books, the picture book pitch letter is going to be much shorter because the story is shorter as well. The letter would start with a brief introduction of yourself, then it would include a summary of your book, like the title, age group, and whatever, and then finally it would have a short biography of yourself. The biography is where you want to really brag about yourself and include any achievements, awards, or past projects that you've had. So I think you can find a lot of pitch letter templates online, but I'm going to share what my pitch letter was like more or less. As the illustrator of numerous picture books and chapter books, including the fabulous APALA honor book Bilal Cooks Dal by Anoosha Syed, her vibrant and diverse work is an absolute joy for all readers. We are thrilled to share that Anoosha has developed her first 2 author-illustrator projects. We feel these projects show an exciting range of the types of stories Anoosha wants to tell: heartwarming, socially relevant, humorous, and with a diverse cast of characters. Anoosha's work is dynamic and vibrant, and we hope that you will fall in love with these books as we have. The first project, That's Not My Name, tells the story of, and this is where I give a summary of the book. The second project is, again, I give a summary here. Anoosha Syed is a Pakistani-Canadian illustrator and character designer for animation. She is the illustrator of APALA honor book Bilal Cooks Dal by Anoosha Syed, as well as I Am Perfectly Designed by Karama Brown and Jason Rachel Brown, the Monster and Boy chapter book series by Hannah Barnaby, and many more. Her work has been featured in the Society of Illustrators Annual, Gallery Nucleus, BBC, and in the Netflix series Bookmarks. Some of her past clients include Google, Netflix, DreamWorks TV, and Disney Junior. In her spare time, Anoosha hosts a YouTube channel focusing on art education. Anoosha has a passion for creating charming characters with an emphasis on diversity and inclusion. She lives in Toronto with her husband. Visit her online at anooshasyed.com or on Twitter and Instagram at foxville_art. So yeah, that's basically what a pitch letter looks like. Obviously, it's going to be different for everyone, and I encourage you guys to check out other examples online. But yeah, this is the pitch letter and it's ready to send out to our submission list. What is a submission list? A submission list is basically a list of people you are sending your submission out to. So it's important to know that there isn't a normal number of people to be on your submission list. You could have just one if you have a dream publisher you want to work with, or you could have a list of 5, 8, 11, whatever. My submission list had 10 editors on it in total, mostly from the Big 5 publishers. Some of the same publishers came up more than once on the list because I was submitting to different editors in different imprints, but within the same publisher, if that makes sense. So this list is usually going to be compiled by the agent and would depend on their knowledge of the market, their connections, and also any previous interest you might have. So 2 other illustrators that I talked to, their agents came up with their list by themselves. In my list, I had imprints that Taylor had connections with and thought I could be a good fit for. It also included some editors I had worked with in the past and I wanted to work with again. And finally, it also included some editors and art directors who had prior interest in my debut. So being an illustrator for the past 5 years worked to my advantage because over the years I did have contact with publishers through conventions and social media who were like, "Hey Anoosha, we like your work. Please let us know if you are ever thinking of writing your own book one day. We'd love to maybe have a part in that." While I was interested in working with everyone on my list, my top choice was working with Viking Children's Books, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. They are a really, really great imprint with a stunning reputation and a lot of award-winning books in their catalog. But more importantly, I really, really wanted to work with their art director, Jim Hoover. I had previously worked on him on a graphic novel project for The Last Kids on Earth, which has just very recently come out, and I had an absolute blast working with him. Literally, he's like the coolest guy. He's so fun to work with. So yeah, because of him, Viking was my top choice. So after we had approved the list, in the last week of September of 2020, Taylor sent out an email to all of the editors on the list with my submission, and then we had to wait. I asked Taylor how long it would be before we got a response back, and honestly, there's no such thing as a normal amount of time to be on submission. It can take weeks or months to get a response, and the process can be filled with rejections upon rejection. You'll usually see the rejections first because an editor who looks at your pitch will immediately know whether it's a good fit for them or not. But if an editor is interested, it might take them some time to respond to you. Depending on the publishing house, there might be a lot of internal people that they have to get approval from first, like finance and marketing and all of that, and all sorts of meetings before they can come back to you with a response. And of course, sadly, there is always a chance that your book never gets picked up. I'm going to link a couple of blog posts below from authors and their experience on being on submission, the success stories, the rejections, and everything in between. I thought that was really helpful. So keeping all of this in mind, I was so stressed out and I mentally prepared myself for waiting for the next few months and what I was going to do in that time to distract me from it. And then a day after sending out the submissions, Taylor gets an email from Anika Kalia, the editor at Viking's Children's Books, and she wanted to set up a call. I was shocked, to say the least. And so we set up a call and we had a really great chat with Anika, and I felt like she really understood what kind of story I was trying to tell. They loved the concept of That's Not My Name, and Anika, being a brown girl, really understood how it felt like having your name being mispronounced all the time. And one thing that I love, one thing that made me really convinced that they were the right ones, was that Anika mentioned that, it's great that I'm writing these big, important message stories and everything with South Asian characters, which is what Not My Name basically is. But she definitely didn't want me to feel pressured to only be writing those kinds of stories, that she wanted to give me the freedom to create, silly stories about cars and animals and stuff. And I was like, girl, yes, you get it. Yes, get it. And yeah, so the call went really well, and she said she was gonna come back to us with an offer, and then the next day they sent over the offer. Okay, so when you have interest from a publisher, it can go a couple of ways. As you saw in my deal announcement, it mentioned that this deal was a preempt. So here are some terms you should know. I'm directly sourcing this from bookensliterary.com. Actually, Bookends Literary has a really, really awesome YouTube channel, which you should definitely check out. They have so much information on pitching and submissions and whatnot. And I will link some videos below as well.
Auction. A publishing auction isn't that different from the ones you see on TV, except it's not in person. In a publishing auction, the publisher is the one on the phone calling in their bid. Auctions occur when more than one publisher is interested in the book, and while there are several ways an agent might run an auction, ultimately it's all about the highest bidder. The publisher who brings in the most, which will include advance, royalties, rights, etc., is the one who wins. Exclusive. An exclusive is when an agent and author give one publisher an exclusive look at the book before sending it to anyone else. There are a number of reasons to give an exclusive. It could be that the editor provided revisions or even gave the author the idea. It could also be that the author just really wants to work with the publisher. Whatever it is, an exclusive submission is given a strict time period in which the author and agent will expect an answer and an offer. Preempt. Preempts happen when a publisher wants a book so bad they offer an amount high enough to convince the agent and author to cancel an auction. In a preempt situation, a determination will be made of how much the author would want to take the book off the table. Once those terms are met, a deal goes forward.
So that's what happened. Anika came back with a good offer for 2 books, but it had to be preempt. And that really stressed me out. It was awesome to hear that they really wanted my book, but it all felt so sudden. It had only been a few days and I didn't even get a chance to hear from anyone else on my list. And if I took their offer, I wouldn't be able to. I was kind of having FOMO, like, what if I take their offer and then I miss out on a really good deal from someone else? But in the end, I kind of figured out my priorities and what I was really looking for. Because Viking was always my first choice because of its reputation and its great art director. That was what was more important to me, and so I took the deal. We negotiated the terms a little bit higher, but that was pretty much it. I should note that later that day, I did get one more response from another publisher from my list who said that although they liked my art and the concept, they already had a similar book in their catalog that they were working on, which would compete with mine, and so I did get one rejection. But it didn't matter in the end because I had a deal and that was it. So I do have to stress that my situation is not usually the norm and that I am so grateful to have had my book picked up so quickly. I still can't believe it. Honestly, I'm really glad that I didn't push to work on my author illustration debut early in my career because I was just starting out and I didn't have the experience and the connections that I have now, and I didn't really establish myself as an illustrator, and I know I definitely would have faced a lot more rejection if I had done it way back then, kind of like what happened with Chip and the Rainy Day. I think that having a lot of illustrated books out there already and experience really did help to boost up my reputation. I did have someone ask me if publishers care about the popularity of an artist, like how many followers they have. I do have a larger follower count than most other artists and authors might, but I can strongly say that it doesn't really play a part in the submission process. Unless you're like an actual celebrity influencer content creator where fans are literally the target audience, it doesn't matter. Publishers will care more about the quality of your work and how well it can sell in the current market rather than what your follower count is. So since then, I've just been working on finishing up my book. My submission was already halfway through the process to begin with. I already had the sketches and stuff finished up. There were only a few minor changes to the manuscript and the artwork, so I was able to immediately start working on the final art and the cover, which is what I'm up to these days. That's pretty much it. How I wrote, submitted, and will eventually publish my debut author illustration book. And again, I want to stress that my journey is not the norm. In fact, I'd argue that there is no such thing as a normal journey for an author or an illustrator in publishing, and it's really different for everyone. It definitely helped already having illustrated books out there, so I know that my experience is going to be different from other illustrators who might be watching, and I already had an agent and a working relationship with her before starting my author journey. Whereas I think what the usual norm is that you would begin by looking for an agent rather than having an agent find you. So to sum up the process for anyone who is interested in writing, pitching, submitting their book, who might be starting from scratch. Number 1, write up your manuscript, and if you're an illustrator, also create your book dummy. Number 2, if you don't already have an agent, get one. I talk about it in length in my 2 videos about agents, so you'll find all the information you need over there on how to get an agent for your book. While it is possible to get a book deal without an agent, I highly recommend that you do get one because they will look out for your best interests and make sure that you are protected. And number 3, once you have an agent, you too will make any necessary changes to the project and eventually send it out for submission. This process can take from a few days, weeks to months, and sadly there are times where you end up with no sale at all at the end of submission. But you can always try again in a little bit, either with a new concept, a new submission list, or even a new agent if you feel like they were not a good fit for you. And of course, this process is really for people who are focused on traditional publishing. Obviously, if you are self-publishing, this process is going to be a lot more different, but unfortunately, I don't have any experience in self-publishing, so I don't have any information about that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That is all the information I have for you for today. I hope it was kind of somewhat helpful. Eventually, when the book does come out, I will make a proper video going over my process in detail. Like, I couldn't really talk about it right now because it's so secret. But yeah, that future videos, I will go in depth into how I wrote it, how I researched for it, how I sketched, illustrated it out, and all of that, but that'll be sometime next year. As a reminder, I'm going to leave a pre-order link below. Like I said, pre-order sales are extremely important for the success of a book, and I would very much appreciate anyone who does a pre-order. As always, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok. I am at foxville_art. And my website is anooshasyed.com. I regularly post most on Instagram, and that's where I post all of my updates for my books, as well as asking your opinions for YouTube videos and whatnot. So do follow me over there. And if you have any questions about anything, if you feel I didn't cover something, or if you want to just give me your 2 cents, please feel free to just let me know. I do try to get back to everyone's comments, and I will try my best to answer them, unless it's about secret stuff or stuff about the deal itself, because I can't do that, you guys. I can't do it. And okay, we're almost done with the video. I'm actually going to end this with a teeny tiny little video I took on the day that I got the confirmation that I got my book deal. I took a reaction video because I wanted to remember that moment and how I felt. And I'm just going to share it with you guys. Yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Hey guys, so today is, what is this, 30th of September 2020, and I'm a little bit teary-eyed right now because I very recently just got off the phone with Taylor, my agent, and I got good news from Penguin Random House that they basically offered me a 2-book picture book deal for my author illustrator debut, which I'm super happy about. It's pretty crazy. I literally we started our submission on Friday, and we got this offer I got the call from this publisher on Wednesday. They were the first people to respond, basically, and I had the call in the morning, and then now in the afternoon they gave me an offer, and it's preemptive. They basically were like, don't talk to anyone else, we want it. So I was a little bit conflicted at first, like, oh, should I wait for other people, or should I keep, should I stick with this one? And me and Taylor decided that this was the good one, and I accepted it, and I just told my husband, and we were really excited, and yep, I'm gonna be an author. Crazy.